Hey everyone, today we have a same project. This is part 2 of the Craftsman Rototiller. In the first part we had a very rusty tank. We didn't have a cover for the air filter. We found out that the transmission is fine for what it appears to be, and for the most part the engine's good. Needed a little bit of a tune-up. The carb was definitely horrible, and you know, it got running. So why is it back on the table? Well, here's the problem. In here, right there, is a adjustment screw. In that adjustment screw, there's the needle. Well, that's not needle. The screw has a taper and it gets thinner, and the more you press it in, that taper then fits into a little groove, and that groove then restricts the fuel the more that you shove it in. I know, jokes everywhere, but there are a couple types of adjustments. This one is kind of different. There's not a jet in there, and originally I thought it wasn't an adjustment screw because there really isn't a jet. Usually how it ends up working is there is a brass jet, maybe 3/4 the size of a penny, in there that you could take out with a flathead screwdriver and clean it out along with the adjustment screw. It's not like that. So usually when that happens, there's a fixed jet. That jet then has you know, the jetting drilled in there. That's not the case on this one. So this one, I do believe, is still a jetted system that is adjustable, but it's not working. I've cleaned this 2 times, took my air compressor, 120, 125 psi, blew through every passageway. It's just not happening. Something in there, and maybe it's cracked. There's something that's causing it to run lean. I tried the mating surface, the gasket, nothing. Everything appears to be fine. Right now I'm to the point where I think it's a carb. Problem is, that carb is very specific because of all the mountings are on it and the governor system that's on there, so it's a little hard. I have this carb that I bought a long time ago. It's a fixed jet though. It's also probably not the highest quality, but it's been sitting in my garage and a drawer for quite some time. I wanted to see if this would work. The reason why I'm kind of leaning towards yes is it does have a screw mount there. That is for the throttle. One of the linkages will connect there. This is normal, so that's good. And in addition, it does have another mount right there, which I do believe we need also for the throttle. So the only thing I'm not too keen on is it is a fixed jet, but at the same time, if we need to, we can drill it out. It's brand new, it's never been used before. So I'm thinking we're going to switch it out and see how it runs. Just going to warn you now, this could be loud at certain points, especially towards the beginning because I will be using an impact, but here we go. Taking out the air filter. Like I said, this is not a very high quality carb. It's definitely a cheap clone. Like a new air filter. The pre-filters in the case. When you do this, make sure your choke is closed. You don't really want the screw to fall in there. So when this is happening, that's why I kind of want to show you, because I already showed you this part, is this. It's primarily 2 main reasons why things are going to run lean on at least this style of engine. One, you have a carburetor that is not liking you right now and is plugged, or a jet is plugged, or something in there is restricting the fuel that it needs to properly provide to the engine. That's probably the most common. Usually good cleaning will just take care of it. In my case, I think there's something lodged in there very securely, or cracked or damaged. There is a Welch plug right here that I could potentially take out and try cleaning again, but the condition of the carburetor when I took it out was pretty minimal. It was pretty bad, excuse me. And eventually the pickup tube also was going to have to be replaced, and when I was working on this earlier, the pickup tube had a thick sludge on it, so it's probably in there as well. So you're, at the very least, you're going to have a little bit of a problem just starting off right there. So when you start to weigh your options, you're going to pick this up, clean it. I was lucky in the fact that when I buy a lot of carbs, and a lot of times the gasket that they comes with, they come with 2 or 3, and I will save all those gaskets, and eventually I will need it, and that's what happened with this one. I saved this gasket from a different project. It might have been an old carb that I replaced. It could have been a carb kit that I just didn't use all of them, because a lot of times those kits will have a variety of sizes in there and shapes and gaskets for everything. So assuming you do not have all that, you're going to be spending $8–10 on a carb kit. Then if you did want to replace the pickup tube, you can buy them separately. You have to replace the pickup tube. You don't have to. You could roll the dice like we did, and maybe that won't be a problem. Now, I'm not saying that's this problem. I'm just saying that could lead to a future problem. So now you're getting to a point where you're taking a whole lot of chances. You really just have to ask yourself, I'm getting pretty close to needing, well, good thing I did that. I didn't put this all the way in. That's not going to cause our problem because I had no issue adjusting RPM. But anyway, you're getting very close to even having to replace it entirely. So why not do that right now? So that's where I'm at. Just the cost of having to replace it really isn't all that much. These carbs are not difficult. I hate to be that person, but the people that made them weren't necessarily rocket scientists. Not to belittle them or anything, of course, but they didn't need to be complicated. This piece is going to fall. So, you know, it does its job. It's a good carb. They've been running it for a very long time. Luckily for us, because it is such a simple carb, they can often be replaced cheaply. That's why we're able to do that now. This came with our new carb, so we don't really care too much about it. There we go. So we're just going to take this little arm off. Leave the linkage right there. Now we need a 3/8 take off. And we need a T25 for this one. The exhaust kind of held it in place. So I guess a summary of my rambling is this. If you are looking at the condition and considering the alternative, it might be easier and more cost effective just to get a new reproduction carb. That isn't always the case for all these, but in this case, considering an OEM carb is very expensive in comparison to others, and usually reproduction carbs, they will have their problems, don't get me wrong, but 99% of the time it's nothing to do with the carbs. It has everything to do with the jetting in those carbs. If you were to take the jets out of your old one, clean them very, very thoroughly, or figure out what the sizes are and then take a micro drill bit set and drill out the new ones to be the same as the ones that came with the old carb, you could very easily have a very good working carb for a very low amount of money. Now, there is an argument to be had that the internal components like the gaskets and everything are not the greatest, and I'm not going to argue with that. They're not. But that just has yet another argument in my case where you should always have quality fuel, because the fuel will be one of those important things. It looks dirty, but it's just like a caked junk on it. Okay, so we're just going to set that in the trash for now. Something else just kind of caught my eye right now. Really wondering about this at the moment. I didn't notice it before, but one of the pits in there on this little chamber, I think might have broken through, because I can see a hole, very small hole, but still is a hole. So that can change things drastically, because if there's a hole, then there's not enough fuel in that little chamber for the main jet to even pick up from. I mean, there is more than enough fuel for this to run. I mean, that's why there's this little cutoff right here. So the overflow fuel, because the fuel is always being pumped into this chamber to then flow back into the tank. But if it never gets to the point where it can adequately feed the carb, that could be a problem. Do a little contemplating on that. Something I'm trying to avoid doing, because I definitely do see a hole. I kind of looked a little deeper and I don't see anything else, but it's just a really small hole. If that's the case, this tank is going to have to be replaced. What I'm going to do right now is a little bit of JB weld. I'm just going to kind of brush it on there. Looks like I might need a little more. According to the package on this, JB weld is gasoline resistant once it is cured. I have quick JB weld, according to the internet. is also gasoline resistant. So I made up the smallest of batches I could. We're gonna put it in there. Let's see if there's any. I cleaned it out, of course, so make sure you do that. Let me see if I can read the directions and see how long this is supposed to take. Mixture will set in 4 minutes. If temperatures are below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, I don't know what that is in Celsius, like 3, 2. Setting time will be longer. So 4 minutes, okay. By the time we get the carb on and the time that we get it all screwed in and everything, it should be well over the 4 minutes. But I don't want to take any chances, so I'm going to let it sit there for, I don't know, 5 minutes before we even continue. I'm not gonna lie, it's been about 10 minutes and it doesn't seem like it's doing very well. So I'm just going to say that it is probably more of the 24-hour type, and we are going to install this and not run it. And then tomorrow I will bring you back for the jet is not going to touch the bottom. There's about 1/8 of an inch or so, but just to make sure, we can always look at it. It's clean, no problems. Yeah, you can screw this one out. I didn't realize that. Interesting. To be honest, I'm probably gonna knock on wood on this one though. I've never had a 5 horsepower carb, aftermarket carb, have a bad jetting. And even if I did, I could usually take out the pilot jet right there, widen that just a little bit, and it will run a tad rich on the low end, but it will be completely fine on the high end afterwards. So at that moment, I usually just bump up the idle a little bit, and call it good. It may or may not be the best of ideas, but it's usually a way around it. Like I said, we're not trying to spend a whole lot of money, but with this one being removable, I might just do that. But like I said, I don't really suspect any problems with that one. They're usually pretty solid in their jetting on this one. That tube on the side, your left side, is a crank vent, or crankcase vent, and it goes from where it takes and releases the pressure that the natural combustion engine will just, or the 4-cycle combustion engine will just make naturally, and some of it will go into the crankcase. If it's pressurized over time, I'm assuming a very short amount of time, if there's too much pressure, you're going to be shooting oil everywhere. There's going to be pressure pushing up on the piston as it's going down, so you're going to have a whole lot of problems there. So they have it vented out, and so what ends up happening is little droplets of oil will be created during the motion of the cycles, and then sometimes those little droplets of oils will then go into the vent and then that will then be taken to the carb, and the carb then shoves those droplets of oil into the intake, and then that is then consumed by the engine. Now, don't think that's weird, because almost every internal combustion engine does that. In fact, I don't know. I would imagine, the exception maybe a 2-cycle or something of that nature, they all would have to. I personally have never worked on one, and I don't think they exist. But if they do, please let me know. I would actually like to hear about one, because that would be very interesting to me to know if that even exists. Because I would just be interested to see, how does that even work? That alone by itself would be interesting. One of the potential problems that one can run into when doing this is that goes on there, that's right. I don't really know how to explain. My mind just went completely blank. The threads, the pitch and the type of threads that were tapped in the carb when they made it, maybe they're metric and we're using standard, who knows. Either way, they'll be different, so that is a concern. If that does happen, you pretty much either have to get a new screw, which in this case is a little hard for you to tell, but these are pretty specific screws. They have a very specific size shoulder on them. They are a very specific length. So that may or may not always be an option. So keep that in mind, but I do not believe we have this problem on this one. I'm hoping this is fairly viewable. So far, the one screw I put in there has been the same. The thread pitch and everything. And the size. Sometimes the size is completely off. And trust me, as much of a fan as I am of grinding until you find it, it's not necessarily a good idea. But you know, you do you. I just would prefer not to have to create more work for myself. But you know what? Like I said, you do you. Now, I'm trying to remember. I think that goes right here. That doesn't look right now at all, does it? Probably because it's not right. Dang it, I did the exact same thing. Okay, there we go. That's looking significantly better. Muy good. Each one of these throttles, linkages, and mechanisms that go on here can be different, so just be mindful on what yours is and is not. This one only has a run and a choke. Sometimes if you don't have the throttle cable, you will have a lever there, and sometimes that lever will have, instead of having this, will have something equivalent to it. But either way, the engine should be set to full throttle, which is right here. When this end is touching, that's full throttle. When this end is touching, that's at idle. So when you let go of it, it should usually always be at full throttle. Instead of having this cable, if you do have that lever on there, oops, there's usually like a lip or something that is there to kind of guide whatever is used to control it. So just keep an eye out for that when you put it on, that you're connecting everything properly. So this is set to full. I'm going to see how this spot is clean. I think I am going to use the same positioning for that. So that is roughly about there. The worrisome part is if you don't do this right, it will not run right speed, obviously, but it can also make it so it doesn't turn off. So when you do this, it makes it even more important that you keep your machine in neutral while you are testing this out. If it does run very, very fast and you happen to have it in gear, that is a recipe for a relatively annoying day. Now this is going to slip in here. This is for the choke. That just goes on top. The reason why I have to put this on relatively soon is that two of the mounting points require these screws. I mean, one's not 100% needed, but still is a good idea to put it in.
That'll be $1,000. Wow, great. Yeah.
Okay, well, this is gonna be annoying. I'm gonna put those screws in. Wow, that was annoying. But we have finished and we are moving past it. There's a gasket on the bottom of this. Set that right there. This usually lines up fairly decently. Sometimes this plate will cause a minor issue. But whenever you're putting in, I would say 2 or more really, screws for something like this, you don't want to cinch them down all hardcore and crazy like until you have at least most of them finger tight. you're not trying to keep out ghosts, so it doesn't have to be super tight. And remember how I told you we have a gasket kit left over sometimes? Well, we do now again. You should be replacing it, but I just replaced that gasket. It didn't rip, it was not being attached to the other one, it didn't really have time to seat all that much, so I don't see it being a problem. Okay, well, so that's installed. Because of the drying time, I'm going to let it sit there for a little bit. We've officially waited a little over 24 hours. Today's Thursday, roughly 5:40 in the afternoon, and I did this on a Wednesday, probably around 2 or 3. So, full day of setting. I also looked at the plastic that I used to mix, and it appears to be very cured. So I would imagine we're doing pretty well. It's in neutral. We are, let's see here, about 3/4. See what happens. Well, that sounds a whole lot better. I didn't realize off was very, was about 1/4 of the way before it actually says it. The other one was kind of like that too, so it's a generic stop. But let's try it again. Full throttle. So, I think we are a tad lean. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out that pilot jet and drill it out just a little bit. Then I'm going to idle it up because that's a pretty low idle. And we'll give it a test. Let me show you actually. This is the old one. It's the same as the new one. To increase the idle, you push the screw in. Right there. And then it keeps the butterfly open, a little more, increasing the idle speed. Okay, drilled it out one size and increased the idle speed. I turned the screw maybe 1.5, 1 3/4 times. Let's see what we have. Full throttle. Oh, half choke. Full choke. Could be a little faster. All the linkages in the way make it difficult. Another half turn out, so maybe 1.25 turns in from the original location. You know what? I think I'm pretty happy with that. So yeah, it's running a whole lot better. I think I'm pretty happy with it. So yeah, unfortunately we couldn't save the original carb, but you know, that happens. You can't always just save it all. So if you do end up having to replace it, you know, these aftermarket ones really aren't too horrible, especially when comparing it to having to buy just a rebuild kit for the old one. I mean, you're pretty much spending like $3 less almost just to have an original used bad carb, when you could just buy a decent aftermarket one and it's good to go. Okay, well, I think this will conclude part 2. So if you like what you see, keep watching, subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next video. Have a good night. One final bit, I realized to mention it. This tank is not repaired. Don't get me wrong. There is repair kits out there for fuel tanks, and they probably are great. 2 thumbs up, would recommend again. Those are not my thumbs though. So I have a different tank, exact same thing. I'm going to be taking that tank off and putting the good used tank on there. I just don't want to go through the hassle of removing it, because it is on an engine that is in my shed in the back of the shed. So I didn't want to have to deal with that, but now I do, and I now know there is good reason to. So I don't want anyone to believe that this is a permanent repair. This is most definitely far from that. This is something that is just enough to get me in the ballpark of knowing if it's okay or if it's repairable or worth repairing. So I'm gonna go ahead and put the new tank on. Just watch the first part. Showed you how to take it off. It's exactly the same thing, except just different tank, but it's exactly the same one. Fuel cap I think might be a little different, but the tank size is the same, black, so we should be good to go. So this is the real end. I'll catch you on the next video. Later.